We're going to be talking about monetizing AI today, and I'm going to try and do kind of a walkthrough of the way I would think about it and the way I've thought about it with other companies. Hopefully, it's going to be very tangible. That's the idea, is that you can actually leverage some of the things that are kind of written here, and hopefully you're sitting with some of these thoughts right now yourself. You might be pricing your own product right now. A little bit about me. So my name is Palle. I am from Denmark originally, but been living abroad for the past 10 years. Right now living in New York City. I worked 5 years at Uber, where I did pricing in Europe. So obviously very different than most other pricing today, which is B2C, a lot of transactions, very different how we priced back then. And then I did pricing at a company called Templafy. So a Series D backed B2B SaaS company, very much focused on the enterprise market, also selling AI products and AI features. And then I've helped a ton of startups with their pricing and monetization strategies. Also, here are some of the products being kind of focused on AI. So that's a little bit about me. We're gonna go through 3 items today. One is going to be, what is the right monetization path for AI feature? So should you monetize or should you not? The second one is packaging. So what is the right way for you to bundle in this feature? And then pricing. What should the price point be? And there's going to be obviously stuff here in between. We are going to be focusing, just in terms of what is the focus for today, we're 100% going to be focusing on the application layer. And we're mostly going to be focused on incumbents that are pricing AI features. So think about your Figma, Microsoft Copilot, all these companies that want to add a new feature. How should they price? How you price native AI apps is a little bit different, because a lot of them are obviously native from the beginning. So a little bit different how you think about it. There's going to be a lot of synergies what we're doing, so hopefully it's going to be valuable. But the core focus here is someone who's had an existing product before AI, and now they need to do something with AI. How do they price that? That's going to be the core topic. Let's jump into it. I think kind of what's new. Obviously, pricing and monetization been around for a long time, but what's new now with AI? I think there's 3 things in particular. That means that you have to think a little bit differently about how you're gonna kind of approach pricing. One is the cost structure. So the underlying cost structures of AI is obviously unlike what we've seen normally in traditional SaaS, and it scales very differently. So you probably need to think about cost in some way, and we're going to talk more about that. There's intense competition right now and kind of a lot of FOMO. So there's this balance between adoption of your AI features, but then also monetizing them. What is the right balance here? And then obviously with AI, some products and some companies, you might be moving away from kind of a 10, 20, 30% increase in productivity of an end user to now actually being able to do most of the work or maybe complete entire work task. That obviously also changed the way you should probably price and charge for your product. So some of these things are new, and that's some of the stuff that we're then going to go through in a second. Again, this is just an overview. You don't have to look at it, but basically, obviously, all companies right now are looking at how do they implement AI. And all of these companies have implemented some sort of AI feature into their product. I like to think that there are probably 5 ways or 5 paths you can take when it comes to monetization of your AI features. And I'll kind of go through them and also give examples later on. And there might be a 6th one here, which is an ad-based model. So you can imagine where it will be indirect, but basically you would not be charging anything, but you'll have revenue coming in via ads. I've almost not seen anyone do this yet. I think maybe there's thoughts of someone like Perplexity might do it at some point, but otherwise no one is really pursuing that yet. So right now, I think there are 5 strategies that I'm seeing out there. You have the add-on strategy, which is defined as direct, and direct is obviously when you are charging for the feature. Indirect being that you're not charging for the feature. So add-ons is where you have an add-on that you can buy on top of existing packages. Standalone is that you create an entirely new product. Then you have included in existing packages. So you have an existing package and you add in the feature, and then you also do a price increase. You then also have where you include it, but you don't add a price increase. So it's just basically for free. And then you have someone that is now offering just free versions of the product. So no strings attached. Those are roughly kind of the 5 monetization strategies that you can take when you have an existing product where you want to add AI features. And Paolo, please just feel free to jump in if there's questions on these slides, and let's take a few. Right now, most of companies, again, we looked at some of the largest companies, and most companies right now are adding their AI features into existing plans. And I think there's a few reasons for that. In most cases, if the feature is not kind of fully built out, if it's not a fully fledged feature, it might make more sense to add it into an existing bundle and then have some kind of price increase associated with that. If you are selling it as a standalone product or as an add-on feature, in most cases, I think you need to be really clear around the value and kind of the maturity of the product. So again, right now, most companies we're seeing are just adding features into the existing bundles, and then adding a price increase on top. In terms of what is the right path to take when it comes to the strategies, I think direct, overall, I recommend pricing directly for a few reasons. But I think some of the questions to ask yourself is, do you have high cost associated? We know that's very, very real cost, particularly if you have high usage. What are those costs? And then clear customer value. So are you providing very, very clear value? I also think you should just be charging a fee directly. On the other hand, I think indirect monetization might be the right way if you see that the feature increases usage of your product in general, increases conversion to other packages, upgrades, or retention becomes super sticky of your product because of this feature. Then you might offset the gain you can get from pricing it or the cost of it for adding it as an indirect feature. And then also intense competition. I think it obviously mostly you're pricing this not in isolation, and so there's going to be a lot of other competitors, and you need to think about how you price. If everyone else is not pricing, it might be hard for you to price, right? So that is something that's going to be unique to kind of your circumstances. So again, in terms of looking at these for cost, what are the costs that we're seeing that you want to understand? It's around compute, bandwidth, data storage and labeling, the security you might have in place, and then the maintenance and upgrades of the models. These are normally the costs that might be associated. These are not all going to apply to you, but I think understanding which one of these are relevant and what they are is super important. In terms of clear customer value, what does that mean? I think if the value is clear and super significant and recognized also by the customer. An example, I think GitHub's coding pilot. I think from a lot of sources right now, it's confirmed that around 30 to 40% productivity increase for people that are using it. I think it's super clear that it's creating value, and it's definitely something you should just monetize directly. And then again, on the other hand, when you do it indirectly, I think it's harder because most often you would have had to the feature should have been live for quite a while before you got enough data points. But again, if the AI features suddenly mean that there's a lot more usage, which means that you can charge more in general, you might not need to monetize it. If a lot more people are then suddenly upgrading to a premium package because there's AI functionality in it, that might be another reason for you not to do it. And again, if customers are a lot more sticky, then you also might not need to increase price. But again, I think indirect is hard, and it's hard to measure, and it takes a while. So in most cases, I prefer direct, unless, as I said down here in italic, sometimes you need to make sure that when you actually do make a price change, if, for example, if you're changing the price of the package, you have a lot of legacy customers. How do you actually do that? That takes time and considerations. So you might want to kind of give it away for free in the beginning until you figure out exactly the right way to monetize it. So it might be a little bit of an interim step just to get it out there, launch it, and then you think about monetization a little bit later. So that was a little bit around how we think about kind of the monetization strategy, whether or not to go direct or indirect. When it comes to packaging, as I mentioned, there are roughly 3 ways you can do this. One is that you basically think the feature is so complete that you create a standalone product. And I'll give you examples of this in a second. The second one is that you create an add-on. So it's going to be something that's added on to that you can buy as an add-on separately. Or then you include it in a pricing plan, and you also do a price increase to get the direct monetization like that. When you think about which way to go about it and how you should bundle your AI features, it's super important to spend time on the what role this AI feature is going to play in your existing product offering. So this is a framework that is inspired or stolen by Simon Kucher in terms of how to look at features. And I like to use this for AI as well. So on the left-hand side, you have adoption of the AI feature, and at the bottom, you have the value to the user, right? So if the adoption is very high, almost all people are using your AI feature, and you see the value they're getting is very high, it will fall into the bucket of what we call a leader feature, where you should just increase the price because everyone will be happy to pay for this. On the other hand, if it's something that a lot of people might be using it, but it doesn't create a whole ton of value, it's kind of a nice to have, you might not kind of be able to raise prices, or maybe a small price increase, depends a little bit on the situation. Again, if you have very low adoption and low value, obviously probably the product is not there yet, and you should obviously not be monetizing it yet. And should probably remove it if you have it into an existing bundle. And then if you have something that's really, really valuable, but only to a few number of users, it's probably makes more sense to use it as an add-on. So have it for someone who really needs that they can buy that on top, but don't include it into any existing packages. So kind of as a framework, I think thinking about where would you actually position your AI feature is a useful exercise to go through. And Paolo, just jump in if there's any questions. Yeah, I think I just basically walked over this before. So to go through the options of how you should monetize, again, the standalone product, Copilot is GitHub Copilot is a great example here, where they've simply created a whole new product that you can buy that is purely focused around the AI capability. I think it makes sense to do it like this when it solves a very different problem than what your rest of your products are doing. And when there's not a lot of overlap with your existing solutions and the buyer and so on. If there's a lot of overlap, you might want to think about solving, adding it into existing bundles. But if it's something that solves a different problem, different buyer potentially, then I would consider doing it as a standalone product. The add-on methodology, I think this is great when you have something that adds value to some users, but potentially not all users. So it's something where some might really want to use it, but some also not really see the value in it. And if you are adding that to a bundle, they might see it as a detraction, and they might want to not continue with their subscription. And then finally, bundle it into an existing plan. I think if you have something that, let's say, maybe 60-70% of the users of your software, they would want to use this feature, then I would add it into an existing bundle. But also where it's not something that might be adding so much value that they will want to buy it separately. But it's kind of somewhere in between, like a nice to have and need to have. Then I would just add it into one of the existing bundles. This is similar to what, for example, Asana did. I think there's an interesting version of the bundle into a system plan. I believe this is Loom, that are right now they're in some ways they're combining an add-on and into an existing plan. So as you can see, they got business plus AI, and the only thing you get on top here is the AI. But obviously the thing is that you could not go onto the starter and then buy it as an add-on. You would have to actually have the business subscription, and then you can do it as an add-on. So a little bit of some kind of fencing in terms of when you can access the AI. One thing that's very important when you do the packaging of your AI features is to, particularly if you have more, I think, is to think about how you distribute the features. So instead of just adding all your functionality into one tier, I think about how you can kind of sprinkle it across the different tiers, depending on kind of what's required for that persona and that buyer. Canva did a really great job of that. Instead of just adding AI, all the AI is one bundle, they've kind of sprinkled it out. So they're going to have some people that wants the free version, but then they might upgrade to the pro version and the team version and so on and so forth. So I think this is really great when you want to focus on upsells and upgrades to other bundles. Sprinkle out your features and don't just add everything into one package. When it comes to, go ahead.
I got it. Yeah, we've got a question for you that has to do with the packaging and pricing. So somebody asked, what if you dive into a scenario where AI is part of the new foundation product, but you still have customers that are straddling both your old product without AI and the new product? How would you think about pricing in that scenario? Or are one of these packages kind of covering that?
Can you try and say that again so we should understand it?
If you have a scenario where you have a customer that is still using your product, original product without AI, and also using it with AI, how would you think about pricing in that scenario?
It's a hard question to answer, I think, without understanding the full context. I don't know if the person can just elaborate a little bit. We'll have to just understand a little bit more about the exact situation, because it's hard to answer that, I think, without understanding a little bit more about the context.
So to the person that asked, if you could add more, I'll re-ask it during Q&A. Go for it, Palle.
Yeah, apologies. In terms of pricing, so what is the price point? How much can you charge for AI? How much should you charge? I think before we get to the price point, I think the most important thing, and this is still holds true in pricing in general, is how you charge. So this thing's defined as the value metric. And I just want to give a little bit intro to that, because I think that's so much more important than the price point, is particularly for AI features, is how you charge. So you have this value metrics. You can largely put them into two buckets. One is functional, which is about kind of how much the user service or how often they do it. And you have outcome-based value metrics, which will be based on the output of your product. So roughly, those are two ways to do it. Value metrics can be something like, number of users, credits, tokens, videos, all those kind of terms would be value metrics. So think a lot about that. What's important here when you think about the value metric, and this is a little bit confusing, but I'll kind of try and guide you through it, is to think about what's the value metric. You need to think about it in terms of your own business, but also in terms of how the customer perceives it. So on the left-hand side here, you have just three random value metrics. It could be number of seats, number of companies, departments. Those could be three value metrics on which you're pricing your product on. What I would do is think about which are the ones that are relevant for your product or your feature, and then basically go through the top line here of these 9 or 10 questions, where you try and score them. For example, what is the relevance? Is this a metric that's relevant to most buyers? Does it apply across all of your use cases, or does it not work for some of your use cases? Is it easy to understand? Is it easy to forecast the price? Does it scale with usage? Does it encourage more usage of your product? Is it simple to measure? Is it easy to enforce? So these are some of the questions that I'll ask for each of the pricing metrics you define. I would try and come up with 5 to 10 proxies, and we'll touch upon it in a few slides. And then you're going to get some kind of scoring at the end, so you know roughly which is the right pricing metric for me to do based on this AI feature. And again, I believe these slides are going to be shared, right? So you can go through this a little bit more detail, but this is a very helpful exercise to go through with your teams. If you want to keep it super simple here, I would just answer these 3 questions to your pricing metric, which is it easy for the customer to understand how you charge? Don't innovate too much on this. Is it aligned with the value that the customer receives in the product? So making sure you talk with them, like, is this also the way you would see value, and the way value can grow if you buy more of it? And then, does it grow with your customers' usage of that value? Because you want to make sure there's a really clear path for them to buying more or using more of the product, and then you make sure you're capturing the value as well. If these 3 things are true, I think that's kind of a gut check for this is probably going to be okay. As an example, if we take HubSpot as an example here, again, they have a lot of products, but this is based on their marketing software. And basically, I think if you look in an ideal world, the perfect measure of value would be the dollar I made through HubSpot, the number of sales I made through HubSpot. Obviously, there's a lot more stuff than whatever HubSpot can kind of focus on or ensure that it does not make sense for them to price based on that, because it's going to be depending on a lot of other variables. But that would obviously be the ideal from a customer point of view. But what is then the best proxies that can kind of mirror that value metric? And that could be number of contacts in there. It could be number of visits. It could be number of web pages, number of users, number of features. There's a bunch of proxies here that probably would make sense. In this case, it's the number of contacts, marketing contacts that you have in there. That's probably a pretty good proxy for also how much money you're making through HubSpot. So again, this is an example, but I would do the same exercise. What's like the ideal value metric that you might not be able to do? And then what are the best kind of proxies for that? And then kind of go through those. In terms of the price points, again, we could only get them properly for the companies that are doing add-ons. That's where you can obviously get the price. what we're seeing in general is here that I just took some of the price points, but you can get an idea of roughly where they are. If you look at the orange bar, that would be the AI feature, versus the gray one would be kind of their professional package, or some kind of a middle package for them, right? So I think one thing is interesting is kind of what is the range that we're seeing. And if you look into price AI features for these large incumbents, we're seeing anywhere from kind of $4 to $30 per user per month. That's roughly the range that they're in. So it probably makes sense if you have a similar product to price somewhere in that range, maybe a little bit higher, probably not lower. And then also kind of the ratio, because like you can see some companies like Copilot, GitHub, and some of these, they're charging more than what their normal kind of SaaS offering is, because the value of the AI feature is so much higher than the normal product. Then also vice versa, you see some cases where you're charging less, right? So understanding what is the right ratio versus your existing offering is kind of the benchmark to think about how much you should charge. And again, how do you actually pick the price point? I think you talk with customers, understanding ROI. You look at competitors. So what are your 5 biggest competitors doing? How are they pricing? And then you understand your cost structure. I think even though early on you might not be super focused on it because it's not going to be significant, once you scale, you want to understand what's the average cost per user and what's the cost for usage, and add that into your cost. A rule of thumb, this is kind of a guideline taken from YC that I think makes a lot of sense, particularly early on, is the 10-5-20 rule. And so I think in terms of the value that you deliver and the price, the value should be 10x of the price. So if you think you're delivering $100 of value, you can charge $10. I kind of like that as a rough guideline. And then in terms of pricing, I think try and raise the prices 5% each quarter, whatever, until 20% of customers kind of push back and say, hey, this price might be a little bit high. I think this is kind of, again, ballpark rule of thumb. I think this kind of makes sense as a guideline. In terms of just looking a little bit forward, I think I'm almost done with the slides. So a little bit looking forward, kind of what are some of the pricing innovations and predictions that I'm seeing right now? I think we're going to see pricing as a competitive advantage, particularly for startups here, not so much incumbents. I think the thing is that incumbents are going to be, it's going to be incredibly hard for them to change their pricing model when you are reporting every quarter. You cannot suddenly change your entire pricing model. That's going to be very hard. So I think pricing is going to be a key competitive advantage for most companies. Uber, where I worked, we used it as a key thing as part of our strategy. We wanted to be 30% cheaper in all the markets that we entered. So Travis was super focused on us not raising prices and making sure that we were actually 30% cheaper than anyone else there, right? Not only did we have a 10x product, we also had a 30% cheaper product that just increased the virality of the product. And so I think if you have, particularly if you're building from scratch, you might be able to charge 50% less, 70% less than other companies out there, and you can use that as an advantage. So that's kind of my first thing that I'm seeing. I think pricing is going to be increasingly important as a competitive advantage. I think the second thing is that we're going to move much more closely away from per user pricing to an outcome-based or success-based pricing. This is already happening with a few companies that are testing it. There are 2 examples here being Chargeflow on the left-hand side that are basically doing that. Whenever they are successful in terms of a chargeback, they get 25% of it and you get the rest. So it's kind of this win-win situation. The other one is Intercom's Fin, where they're charging per resolution. Again, charging for the outcome and not per users, not any input metrics. This is definitely the way to go for most AI features, is to charging on the outcome and not some kind of monthly subscription fee. A pricing model that I personally like a lot, it's not going to apply for all kinds of companies, but that is charging for the work, and again, not the user. So Evenub is great at this. They do demand packages for attorneys, and the way they charge is that they charge per demand package. So if you are a law firm and you're using Evenub, you will just be billed for a demand package you're creating. And again, it's a win-win. You only charge once you generate value for them. And it's very hard for incumbents and other companies to change these 2 models, because when you have a large user base and you have existing revenue and you're reporting quarterly, you almost cannot make changes. And so again, I think pricing, if you can price differently, it's going to be a huge win for you. So in terms of the key takeaways, my rule of kind of guideline is to monetize directly if you can. I think you also want to get your feature out there, and I think you want to understand what is the willingness to pay for consumers. How much do they want to pay? Do they even want to pay for it? So instead of kind of waiting with that and just getting adoption, actually try and charge them for it. The second thing is spending time on understanding what role the feature plays in your product offering. So how much and how should you charge? And how do you bundle this in? And then ensuring the right value metric. I think in most cases, what makes sense right now, you don't want to move too fast on innovating on the value metrics, because some companies might not be ready for it. They want predictability. But I think having a subscription-based fee and then a usage-based component is normally what makes the most sense right now. Again, this was very fast, very high level. I write a lot more in detail about different pricing strategies, and in general go into a lot more detail. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn and subscribe to my newsletter, where I write a lot more kind of tactical and in-depth about pricing and packaging and monetization. And also, if you want to reach out, you can always do that on pallebroe.com. If you want me to, if you have more detailed questions around maybe different scenarios, something we didn't touch on, feel free to just reach out, and I'll see if I can help. I hope that was helpful. And if you got any questions, please feel free.
You've got a lot of questions here. So I'll start off with one question that was submitted by Rebecca. Have you seen any great ways of testing the value of the AI features prior to development or launch to understand the value versus adoption matrix?
I'm not sure I got the best answer, but I think what all companies are doing to understand this is, one, they run a beta program. So obviously you would invite a certain number of users to come in and test the user, and you're going to use those users to kind of define the value and define and check pricing points. So this is not super uncommon for what you would do for most other pricing features, which is kind of the customer research. But adding a beta program is normally the way I would think about it, getting those details.
So continuing on this line of value, are the proxies for measuring value per feature? So do different features in a product, should they have different ways of attributing value? And if so, do you have any recommendations on how to define proxies if it's per feature?
Yeah, I think they should have, and this will again be quite depending on the context. But I think you don't want to have too many value metrics, so you don't want to have too many things you're charging on. I think normally 1 to 3 is normally the right level, because otherwise it gets confusing and the customer will not know how much they're going to be charging. So you can't add too many, but I think you can also add some as fences or as caps. So it might be that you have 1 or 2 that you want to use for pricing, but then you have some that kind of caps on usage, or basically caps between different tiers. And I think you both want to have usage caps, and you also want to have feature caps that kind of differentiates different packages and make sure you have kind of the right upsells between. But yeah, totally, you can have different metrics for different features.
So now let's take this question from Patrick. Let's say you're rolling out in phases your pricing. Say Confluence or Atlassian, they offered it for free at first, their AI feature as a beta, and then put it behind a pricing wall. What's your take on this sort of rolling out type of strategy?
So is that about that you would first roll it out as a beta for free?
As free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the way most company does it. What I've seen in the past, I think for the past kind of 12, 18 months, is that you want to get usage, you want to get people to test it out. You probably have design partners. You're kind of going back to almost building, right? So you would do that initially, and then I think at some point you want to monetize it, and then it becomes a paid program. So I think, that's totally the right way to go about it. I think once you roll it out, particularly for a large existing user base, you really want to think about the kind of change management of that and how you actually integrate existing customers if you're doing a sampling package. So definitely don't do. I would definitely think a lot about the pricing when you have large existing user base. And we can talk more about this specific example, but I think the right way to do it, yeah.
Now we have this question from Manoj where he says, in the examples that you showed, they seem to be on par with on a seat basis with no metering. What do you advise companies to, or how do you advise companies to account for the fact that AI could reduce the number of seats due to automation?
Yeah, so it's a good observation. So basically everyone is charging per seat still, which is, I guess, a little bit contradiction to what I presented. I think it's purely a matter of these customers having a hard time to innovate on it, probably. I think it's a lot easier to charge per seat. All companies are used to buying per seat. Everyone understands that. I think that's the only reason why companies are starting up price per seat. I think over time, this is going to change. And sorry, just ask the question again, Palle? The last part?
It was just how do you account for if the number of seats are actually decreasing because of the implementation of AI when there's so much seat-based pricing?
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's going to happen. So what you have to do is then you need to have a transition plan to a usage-based, outcome-based focused. So it depends, again, a little bit on the product and the value adding. But in general, there's going to be less and less users or seats to charge for. And the way is simply to find a different way to charge for your product. So you need to almost redefine the value and the value metrics. Let me try to think if there's some good examples. Yeah, this is not a great example. No, for example, Microsoft, they rolled out a Copilot for security. And for the first time, I think they're charging per hour or something. So I think you can see these large companies starting to think about how can I charge differently per user when there's going to be, in general, less people doing the work and much more AI doing the work. So there needs to be some kind of transition because you cannot go one day to another, complete transitioning everything, right? That's impossible. So some kind of transition.
So we're kind of diving into a little bit of like what are some of the risks around implementing pricing or changing pricing. Somebody asked, what are the biggest landmines to avoid when pricing an AI product? What are the worst things a company can do to turn away potential customers?
I think the single worst thing that I'm seeing right now when I talk with people is when you add an AI feature into a bundle and you increase the price, but the value is not there to the end user. And so a lot of the big companies have actually made this mistake. I think when they haven't really thought out, either they overestimated the feature or they overestimated the usage of it. But I don't know how you think about this, but in general, most of the AI features that are right now embedded in these are large applications. I don't find that many of them super useful. Like I'll be totally fine without. It's not the core reason I use the product. If you overvaluate your feature and you suddenly charge more for it, without the value being there, I think you're going to see a lot of churn from customers because they don't want to pay for something they're not actually using. So that's the biggest mistake I'm seeing right now. And in that case, again, what would I do? Either I would make sure that you really understand the value to the users of the packages, or then I would just do it as an add-on. The add-on is in some way risk-free because people can decide to add it on, right? And you really understand, is this something people are willing to pay for? So I'll probably do an add-on instead.
So on this topic of value, I'm going to combine two questions here. One person asked, how do you validate the value of a feature? And somebody else asked, could you just rely on usage data to see if a certain AI feature is a crucial feature, or should you be running surveys, or should you be doing something else to validate the value of an AI feature?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the amount of effort you want to put into it. The simple way in some cases would be to just evaluate based on usage. So if you got product usage and you can see the use of the feature is super high, that is obviously a strong signal that there's probably something that's working. I think the combination is always better. And that is not very different from kind of normal pricing would be user research and asking the right questions to the users that are using it, right? So again, I can maybe share some stuff afterwards on how you ask those questions to understand if the value is actually there. But I would combine both if possible to truly understand the value.
Now, again, this is related, but what is the right approach to monetizing an AI feature when you just have little data on what the usage patterns are going to look like, or if there is value to what you're rolling out? You just don't know, and you don't have data yet. What do you do?
Yeah, I think in that case, and that's obviously the case for most companies, right? That initially you're not really sure. And it might be that you start out with kind of a very immature product. It's just like a very tiny feature, and then you probably have plans to build this feature towards something else in the future. So I think most people then would, there's probably two or three paths to go down. One is just to add it in there for free and to just let users play around with it for free to then kind of start to get data, understand the value. The other idea is to have some kind of closed beta where you have a subset of companies, maybe someone you know really well, that has access to the feature. So create a lot of the big companies have done these beta programs, a waitlist where you sign up and then you might kind of be selected to use the feature. That's because you want to understand the value of it. And then the third thing would be to add it into an existing bundle as a free feature in that bundle. I think it might be similar to the first thing I mentioned, but those are the ways that I would go about it before you get data, is just to get adoption. And again, 12, 24 months ago, this is what all the big tech companies did. No one was charging for it. They just added it in there in closed betas, or they added into features.
So let's think about adoption. Daniel here asks, how do you think about the trade-off as your AI feature is being adopted more? That'll mean more AI compute. That'll mean more value generated, potentially. That could also mean higher costs. So does that mean you need to price higher? How do you strike that balance of more adoption, more costs, and pricing?
Yeah, so in general, the question of monetization and what should you focus on? I think, again, if you're a very early stage startup, I don't really think monetization and willingness to kind of leaving money on the table, I don't think those things really matter, because it's something else that's important, which is probably showing some kind of adoption and showing that you can charge. But then obviously go much later stage, I think profitability, margins, that stuff become much more important. So it depends a little bit on where you're at. Normally, I've never been a big fan of cost plus pricing. I think anyone is in the technology industry. You really want to capture the value of the product. So I still think a value-based approach is important. But I do think here, and this will depend again a lot on the company and what is your kind of underlying models and so on they're using. But if the cost is really significant and there's kind of no caps in place, you just want to make sure that you're not kind of bankrupting yourself, or that you actually make sure that each incremental usage or user is going to be profitable. Particularly if you're kind of more later stage company, this is important because you can't just be giving it away for free forever. Yeah.
And this is another question that's related to that, but from Daniel. What if the new AI feature is making people redundant or making several expenses redundant for your customer? Should you go for the full cost of what is being displaced for your pricing?
No, I think you can. So one is that I think in reality that cost, let's say it's headcount, or let's say it's people. On the company side, it takes a while before that cost kind of is actualized in there, because like they will only understand that they need less people. It's going to take, there's a delay, right? So you cannot just charge for that person immediately, unless it's like increased revenue on their side or something. So one is that I would wait a little bit with, it might be something where you gradually charge more and more. I think the other thing is that normally I think it's right to capture between 20 to 30 to 40% of the value, because there's always a little bit of uncertainty exactly how capturing the value, right? So I think you can never just say, hey, we're replacing this person who is costing you $100,000, we're going to charge you $100,000. I would probably then say we can charge, 20, 30K or so.
Now, Lawrence wants to know a little bit about just the different types of pricing models we can consider. What is that tipping point between including an AI capability as a part of your bundle versus breaking it out as an add-on?
Yeah, I mean, I hate kind of giving these kind of if or maybe answers, but I think it does depend. But I think, as I mentioned, some numbers that I normally, when I work with companies, around whether or not something should be an add-on really depends on how many people would like to use this. In general, I'm a pretty big fan of having different tiers for most companies, but then also having add-ons on top. So if you have a feature that some people or a certain customer segment, they absolutely love this and they really want to pay a lot of money for it, I would use it as an add-on. So that might be, let's say, only 10%, 5, 10%, 15, 20%, but there is a lot of value in it. Then I think it's leaning towards an add-on. Because the worst thing, again, for people, you might know this yourself, is that if you buy something and you don't use, and there's something in the package that you would never use, and then you would much rather remove that from the package, because sometimes you can even charge more when it's not there. But the feeling of having something in there that you don't use, it's super detrimental for the customer. So if that is the case, that is the feature that most people would not use, I would just not have it in there. So that's normally how I think about add-on versus included. Yeah.
All right, I know we're right at time. Do you have time for one more question to wrap us up?
Sure.
All right, last question is, have you observed any successful outcome-based pricing implemented around AI capabilities?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to know the exact numbers of these companies, and I think it's pretty it's probably pretty confidential. But I think most of the AI native companies are going down the path of trying to charge either purely usage based or charging for the outcome. So again, I mentioned some examples before. But I think if you can imagine that, let's say you're competing with a company that what they're offering to the company is that it makes their end users, let's take the example of EvenUp. Let's say they make their end users 20%, 30% more efficient when creating demand packages versus your company, the AI native company, that does the entire demand package and basically reduces the entire need for them, right? So it makes them 100% productive, whatever you call it. I think the pricing power you have there and your ability to price is going to be so different, because you can basically start to charge for the person or the value of the work, which is very significant versus what you can charge for a productivity increase. So I think in general, all those companies, and there's a lot of them that are promising an end user 10, 20, 30, 40% productivity increase in their daily job. I think they're pretty much at risk for the companies that are doing those jobs using AI, also in terms of pricing power and stuff like that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Palle, for sharing your expertise with everybody on monetizing AI, such a current and hot topic. Thank you, everybody that attended, and thank you so much for submitting so many questions. Love how engaged people were. Otherwise, we'll be sending a recording and the deck out to anybody that registered, so be on the lookout. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.